Today's Daf Yomi is Nedarim, Ayin Aleph, Nedarim 71. So let's go to the top of 71a, Ayin Aleph, Amud Aleph, at the Mishnah. So the Mishnah says, Nidara, let's say she takes a vow, Vihi Arusa, so a girl makes a vow while she is betrothed. And Nisgarsha, then after she takes this vow, she becomes divorced. Bo bayom, she gets divorced, and then on that same day where she had been divorced from the day she made the vow, she got divorced that same day, and then on that same day, nisarsa bo bayom, she got engaged again. Even to 100 different people, meaning she made a vow, she got divorced. She was betrothed, she made a vow, she got divorced, she was betrothed again, divorced, even up to 100 times. Then Avia Ubawa Acharon Mafir Nidara, her father and her final husband are the ones who can annul her vow. And the Ran explains what's going on here. The Ran says that it's teaching us this concept, the Aros Meifar Bekodmin B'Shutfis, that the Aros, her fiance, meaning her final fiance here, can annul the vows that she had made earlier while she was engaged. That, and we'll see from Shmuel and the Gemara, even if her first fiance had heard these vows, he can do this in partnership with the father. And continues around, the reason why it emphasizes is that she was divorced that day and then she became betrothed that day. We're talking about a case where, and Shmuel is going to teach us in the Gemara, the Aros had heard the vows, the Shama Aros, O Shama Av, that the Aros or the father had heard these vows. And so that's why it has to be specifically on that day. But the day afterwards, it wouldn't work, because since one of them had heard it and the low hayfair, and he didn't annul the vow that same day, the other one of them heard it and he didn't annul the vow, then her vow is going to be upheld. Back to the Mishnah. This is the rule. Whichever girl does not go into the domain of herself for a moment, meaning to say if she doesn't become an adult or if she doesn't become fully married, then Avia Ubawa Achron Mafir Nidara, then her father and her final husband are the ones who annul the vow. I mean, the final fiance, they are the ones who annul the vow. Because, explains the Ran, if she had become an adult or if she completely married to her husband, then she's no longer under the jurisdiction of her father, and the Aros by himself would not be able to annul the vow. When she gets fully married, then even though she's divorced, the Aros by himself cannot annul the vow. So now the Gemara asks the question, what's the source for this idea? I mean, now on the Aros Achron, Mayfair Nedarim Sheniru Aros Rishon. How do we know that the final Aros in this case can annul the vows that were heard by the first fiance? Amar Shmuel, Amar Krad, Shmuel says that this is based upon a verse. It says in the pasuk, "Ve'emayo siela ish undareh aleha." This is the pasuk that we've cited several times in our chapter. That means to say, "Ve'emayo siela ish," and shall be with the man undareh aleha, when the vows were already upon her. Meaning to say, "Nedarim sha'ayu aleha kfar," the vows that she already had when she, Hayosia implies a second husband, and so therefore he can annul the vows. Nidarel means the vows that she had already made while she was with the first fiance. The first Arus, we're translating Arus as fiance, means that he's formally engaged. Those vows can be annulled by the second Arus. So that's what it's teaching us. So the Gemara says, well, how does Shmuel know that? Maybe when it's telling us the second fiance can annul the vows that were made when she was married to the first fiance, when she was betrothed to the first fiance, maybe that's only where the first fiance didn't hear the vows explicitly. But the vows that were heard by the first fiance, so maybe, maybe the second fiance can annul those vows, as thing Mar, but maybe can only annul those vows that were not heard by the first fiance. And if the first fiance was actually hearing the vows, then maybe the second fiance can't annul the vows. So the Gemara says, no, alel, the word alel in this verse is kraya seirahu. It's an extra word, it's an extra verse, and that extra verse is to teach us this concept that the second aros can annul the vows even if the first aros had heard the vow. So this was the chiddush of Shmuel. So this was the concept of Shmuel, that the second aros can annul the vow even if the first aros hears it. So the Gemara says, Tanya vasi de Shmuel. We have a brisa that supports this teaching of Shmuel, meaning to say that Shmuel has a source for this concept, and this is based upon a brisa. And what's the brisa? The brisa says, Nara hamurasa. Let's say you have a Nara who is engaged. Avia ubawa mefiri nidara. So you have this girl, she's between the age of 12 and 12 and a half. Her father and her fiance can annul her vows. Ketzad, what's the scenario where the father and the husband can annul the vows? So the first scenario is Shama Avia. Let's say the father hears the vow, Vehefirla, and the father annuls the vow. Well, he speak about Shmoa ad shemes, and the husband doesn't hear the vow, and he dies before he hears the vow. So the first husband has never heard the vow. And it's Arsa Bo Bayom, and then she becomes betrothed again on that day. I feel me'apam, even 100 times, but each time the Aros is not hearing the vow. Avia ubawa achron mefirin idara. The father and the final husband can reject the vow. But this is not taught us the chiddush of Shmuel, because the chiddush of Shmuel is even where the Aros has heard the vow. But in this case, it says, well, he speak about Shmuel, that the Aros have not yet heard the vow. So we have not yet saw a support yet for Shmuel's teaching. But now we come to the second law of this brisa. The second one of this brisa says, Shama Bawa. So this is exactly the case of Shmuel. Let's say the husband has heard this vow. Vehefirla. Let's say the husband has heard the vow and he's rejected the vow. Well, he speak av l'shmoa ad shemes habal. So in this case, it's also not the same thing as Shmuel, because now he hears it, but he has rejected it. In the case of Shmuel, he didn't hear it, but in this case, the husband hears it and he rejects it, and the father has not heard it ad shemes habal until such time as the husband has died. So now the father has to go back and reject the portion of the husband, meaning to say that in this case, the husband heard the vow. He rejected the vow, but the father hadn't heard it. And now the husband has died. So the father has to go back and reject her vow. Let's see what the Ran says. Shama Bala Vaheferlah. So we said Choser Avu Mefer Chalkol Shalbal. Why? The Avu Chudei Matze Mefer. That the father by himself can reject it. Afal Pishin is Arsala Acher. The Ran says, even though she became betrothed to another person, the Mefarish time will come on. The Gemara is going to explain it, or the Ran's going to explain it later on. V'chikatani Mefer Chalkol Shalbal. Inachinami the Chelk Asmo Gam Ken Yefer. When he re-rejects the portion of the husband, he's also doing his own. So, but the Talmud doesn't have to tell us that the father also has to reject it, because that's an obvious thing. So we see here that the father has to go back and reject the vow of the husband who has died. So now we go to the next case. Amar Rabbi Nassan, hein hein divrei Beis Shammai. So Rabbi Nassan says this idea that under these circumstances, the father has to go back and reject the vow of the husband. We'll see that this is the position of Beis Shammai, and we'll see why in the Gemara. But Beis Hillel omrim ein yachol hafer. Beis Hillel says under these circumstances, he's not going to. The father will not be able to annul the vow, meaning to say, he needs the aros achron, the final aros, to annul the vow. In a case where the first aros heard it and annulled it, he needs the final aros to come back and annul it again. Wow, that's the position of Beis Hillel, and we'll see why. What's the nature of their dispute? So the Gemara explains, Beis Shammai is of the position, Nedarim nami sharai la'aros nisraknu rishus la'av umegos gayas. So Beis Shammai is of the position that vows that were heard by the first husband, they are nisrokna rishus la'av, and they are completely, meaning to say, if the aros dies, that even though these vows were roy la'aros, that he heard them, that they are given their authority completely over to the father. And so therefore, the father, so the reason is because he holds, the Beis Shammai is in the position, megas gayas, that when one of them acts on a vow, they are megas gayas. They are severing the vow, and they're completely allowing their portion. So therefore, after the first oros, says Beis Shammai, has annulled his portion, his action is completely done, and he has been removed from it completely, and so therefore he has no connection to it whatsoever. So therefore, even after she becomes betrothed to another person, the father by himself has to annul the whole vow because the husband is no longer there. So Beis Shammai is saying, in this case, where the first aros has annulled the vow, what we're in essence saying is that he was megas guy, as he completely finished with his share. He cut it off completely. And so therefore, the only thing that's left is for the father to do his portion. Father does his portion, and then the vow is completely annulled. That's why Beis Shammai says that in this case that we were talking about on Amar Aleph, where the husband hears it and he annulled the vow, and now the father basically comes back and does the portion of the husband, because everything is up to the husband at that point. Everything is up to the father at that point. And the Ran explains, so even though after the first aros dies, his nullification is canceled, nevertheless, his rejection in its time removed him from the vow, and so therefore it stood completely in the jurisdiction of the father. But Beis Hillel is of the position, and this is going through the source for. So Beis Hillel is of the position. Beis Hillel is savri avia ubawa achro mafir nedarah, that the father and the final aros are required to annul the vow. Why? Because Beis Hillel is of the position, says the Gemara, because below megas gayas, the husband with his rejection of the vow, he is not megas gayas. He's not completely severing her vow. He is miklash kolish. He is just diminishing the potency of the vow. And this diminishing is not an act in and of itself, and therefore it won't be applicable until the father also does the diminishing. And so therefore, until the father does his own rejection, therefore the law of the aros is still relevant to the vow. And so therefore, when she would become betrothed to a second person, the second person would basically be in the parasha, be under that jurisdiction. She'd be under his jurisdiction. And so therefore, the second fiance would gain the rights that the first fiance had. And so therefore, he can annul the vows together with the father. And this is the source for Shmuel's principle that where the first Aros hears it, the second Aros has the ability to annul that vow. And that's, so basically the source for Shmuel's law is based upon this teaching of Beis Hillel. So that, and it's based upon the concept that when the Aros would annul the vow by himself, he's not megas, guys, he's not severing it, but he is mikosh kolish. He is diminishing its potency. So the Gemara now raises another question. Ibayu, says the Gemara, the Aros who divorced his betrothed while she still has a vow, how do we view the nature of that divorce? Gerushin kishtika damya. Do we view the fact that he divorced her, knowing at that point that he's losing his right to annul her vow? Do we view that as though that silence is in essence nothing? He's not. We can't read anything into that action. Do we view that action as just silence? And so basically, he's not rejecting and he's not upholding her vow. Or do we say, no, since he had the ability to reject her vow, and now he is divorcing her, so thereby he is losing that ability to reject her vow, do we say it's ka'akamadamya, that it is like he has upheld the vow? And so therefore, since it's like he's upheld the vow, we're going to say that he's no longer able to revoke her vow. And so the Gemara says, well, why do we care? Why do we care? He's not married to her anymore. So why do we care if he lost her ability to annul her vow at that point? So in my nafkamina, why do we care about this point? The Gemara explains, so let's say the reason why we care is because we're talking about a circumstance where the Nara Murasa made a vow and her husband heard this and he divorced her, okay? And then all that is the question in the Gemara, Ve'ahadra biyome, and then he remarried her that same day. So do we say that by divorcing her the first time, it was like he was upholding the vow? Or do we say there's nothing that we can read into the fact that he divorced her the first time? If you want to say that the divorce is basically nothing, you can't read anything into it, it's just silence, it's not a rejection, and it's not akama, matzi meifra. Now at this point, he's going to be able to reject her vow. And the Aros together with the father, so therefore he's able to reject her vow together with the father after she's betrothed. But if you want to say that it's like he's upheld her vow, then then he's not going to be able to divorce her. Okay, so the Gemara is going to try and answer this question. How do we view, in this case of the Nara Murasa, where she was divorced on that day and then remarried, do we view the first divorce, or do we do the divorce as though it was shtika, in which case he'd now be able to reject the vow, or do we view it as an implicit hakama, an implicit upholding of the vow because he was waiving his rights, and so therefore he's no longer able to annul the vow? So the Gemara says, let's look at this. Let's try and bring a proof from a brisa, and we're going to try and bring the proof that gerushin is like this hakama. Because we said in the brisa, Emasai Amru Mei Sabal Nisrok Rishus La'av. When did they teach that when the husband dies, the authority of the husband is transferred to the father? Only bisman, do we say bisman shelo shama ba'al? It's only in a situation where the husband has not heard the vow. Oh, Shama, or maybe he's heard the vow, ve'hafer, or he's heard the vow and he's rejected it. Oh, Shama v'shasak umeis bo bayom, or he's heard it and he was silent and then he dies that day. So we'll review this brisa. That the brisa is saying, when do we say that if the husband dies, the father gets the authority to annul the vows on his own? Only in one of three circumstances. Only in the circumstances where the husband A did not hear it, or he heard it and rejected it, so therefore he's done his part, or he's heard it and was silent, and then he died later that day. So therefore, where he didn't actually uphold the vow, the authority is going to go to the father for the father to annul the vows on his own. And if we're going to say that divorce is basically, in essence, the upholding of the vow, the quasi upholding of the vow, we could have also listed a case where he gets to where does the authority get passed to the father, where he heard and divorced her. The fact that it doesn't list that in the case of divorce, the authority goes to the father. We learn from here that the divorce is like the upholding of the vow. And this should answer the question. The Gemara says no. The Gemara says we can't say that. Why? Because Ema Seifa. But the next clause of the Brisa states, Avalim Shama V'Kiyem. The next case of the Brisa says where the authority does not transfer to the father. Let's say the husband upheld the vow. O Shama V'Shasak. Or let's say he heard it and was silent. Umeis Biyom Shel Achrav. And then he died the next day, meaning he didn't take advantage of that day to annul the vow. And Yachol Hafer. So then the father can no longer annul the vow because either the husband upheld the vow or went beyond the one day that they're able to reject the vow. And so we see from here something more. If you want to say that divorce is like upholding of the vow, then listening, it should have listed this case as another example of hakama. So therefore, we could have learned the exact opposite implication that gerushin, that divorce is like silence. So from this, we can't learn anything. So we can't derive anything from this. So the Gemara basically is not able to prove from here because the Gemara says, if the Reish is specifically only referring to those three cases, those are the only three cases where the authority goes to the father, but not in the case of divorce. Nasav Sefer Mishum Reisha. Then we need to say that we have to the Seifa is not exact, and Seifa Dafka Nasav Reisha Mishum Seifa, and the Reisha is not exact, and so therefore we have we don't know how to do it, and so therefore we don't know which one of these is not referring to these exact cases and is more expansive that are listed in the Brisa. And for this reason, we can't use this Brisa as a proof to answer this question, whether or not gerushin is like shtika. And so we'll pick this up. Hold on, let's stop the recording. Actually,